It was May of 2024, the kind of bright Carolina morning that fools you into thinking peace is simple. The air outside Fort Bragg carried that faint metallic hum of ceremony, marching boots on concrete, a brass band tuning somewhere behind the parade field. I parked my Jeep by the visitor center, smoothing the wrinkle on my dress uniform sleeve. The metal bar caught the sun and flared for a second, a small gold flash that felt like defiance. Inside the passenger seat sat a square gift box wrapped in navy paper. It was a framed photo of my father and me from West Point the last time we had looked like a family. I carried it toward the gate, hearing the familiar cadence of orders in the distance. The guards saluted, their eyes flicking to my uniform, to the rank pinned on my chest. Captain Dana Whitlock, U.S. Army Intelligence, daughter of the man being honored today. I had rehearsed the moment for weeks, the way I would stand the words I might finally say. 35 years of service, one family. I thought it might still mean something. My mother stood waiting by the entrance in a pressed navy suit that matched the banner behind her. Honoring 35 years of service. Colonel Richard Whitlock. Her posture was flawless, practiced. Even her disappointment had discipline. In her right hand, she held the printed guest list. My name was not on it. Her voice carried the same calm precision she used on church Sundays. "You are not invited, Dana. Go home." She did not whisper. She wanted the sentries to hear. She wanted me to absorb the humiliation cleanly, like a punishment deserved. I said nothing. Behind her, through the open doors, I could see the hall washed in warm light, flags draped champagne glasses on white linen, officers in full dress. A young soldier adjusted the microphone. The band shifted to a slow march. My father stood near the podium, rigid as a monument, eyes scanning the crowd. When they passed over me, they didn't stop. He looked through me like I was background noise. That was the first moment I realized silence could sound like a verdict. My mother stepped closer. "You showing up uninvited would cause a scene," she said softly. "This day is about your father, not your grievances." I wanted to ask what family ceremony excluded family, but her gaze cut sharper than any order I had ever received in the field. So I turned away. The box in my hand suddenly felt heavy, the corners pressing into my palm. The brass band started the anthem. I walked back toward the parking lot, each note echoing like a command I refused to follow. By the time I reached my Jeep, my hands were trembling. Not from anger, from recognition. I had been trained to read silence in radio static and missing transmissions in the hush before something breaks. This silence was louder. I set the gift box on the passenger seat. Inside, the photo frame had cracked, a thin line across my face. I stared at it for a long time until my phone screen lit up, no messages, no calls. 10 years of service overseas, a Bronze Star, a commendation for valor, and still no seat at my father's table. The band music drifted from the hall, muffled by distance. I opened the Notes app and began to type. No names, just the truth. The words formed faster than thought. The daughter of a decorated officer was told to go home today. She obeyed. The uniform does not protect you from family. I read it twice, then deleted it. The act of writing steadied me. In combat, silence means survival. In families, it means exile. I looked once more toward the hall. Through the glass, I could see them raising their glasses. The laughter reached me like heat through glass, visible but untouchable. I got into my Jeep, started the engine, and sat there with my hand on the wheel. I thought about turning around, about walking back in just once, about saying the one sentence that might finally shatter their calm. Instead, I took a breath that hurt all the way down, shifted into drive, and left the music behind. The sunlight caught the rearview mirror, slicing through my reflection. For a second, it looked like a medal. For a second, it almost looked like freedom. What would you have done? Walked away or walked in? The memory of that morning at Fort Bragg always drags me back to another parade field 10 years earlier when I still believed approval could be earned. It was May 2014, the day I graduated from West Point. The air smelled like polish and pride. Rows of cadets stood in perfect alignment, the brass on our uniforms flashing like sunlight on water. I spotted my parents in the stands before the ceremony began. My father, Colonel Richard Whitlock, stood ramrod straight, even off-duty hands behind his back, evaluating the precision of every salute. My mother sat next to him, her smile polite and frozen. When my name was called, she clapped exactly 3 times. Afterward, she hugged me stiffly and whispered, "A woman in intelligence. That's paperwork, not service." I was still holding my diploma when she said it. My father didn't correct her. He just nodded once as if to mark her opinion official. The photographer caught us that way, me smiling through it, her posture unyielding, his silence filling the frame. That photograph would later sit on his office shelf for years, a reminder of the daughter who disappeared into duty. My first assignment came fast Germany in the Intelligence Analysis Division. I left within a month, telling myself distance could make affection easier. The emails started out long, filled with updates about the base weather and local bakeries I pretended to visit. My mother replied with short notes about church and the garden, never about pride. My father's messages were even shorter. One line sometimes too. "Keep your focus, Captain. Make us proud." There was never a "we are proud," just the command to earn it. By the second year, I stopped checking my inbox before bed. In 2018, after a deployment rotation in Syria, I came home on leave for the first time in almost 3 years. I had lost weight, gained lines under my eyes, and learned the quiet efficiency of survival. I remember standing in the kitchen of our Fayetteville house, the same one with the polished floors and framed commendations lining the hallway. My mother looked me over like an inspector at a ceremony. "You dress like the men now," she said. I smiled, trying to make it a joke. "Out there, it helps." She didn't laugh. "Your posture's harder, too. You used to smile more." "Maybe I learned that from you," I said, softer than I felt. She turned away to stir her coffee. My father entered a moment later, still in uniform, even though he was home. He shook my hand. It was how he greeted officers, not daughters. The meal that night was quiet. Every story I told about the mission landed flat. He corrected minor details. She refilled his glass and said nothing. I left the table early, excusing myself under the pretense of jet lag. From my old bedroom, I could hear them downstairs, their voices low and measured, discussing me like an after-action report. When I left the next morning, there were no goodbyes, just the sound of the front door closing behind me. The house didn't echo. It absorbed. By then, I had already started keeping a second journal, one without ranks or acronyms, just moments I couldn't name aloud. Pages of absence. Sometimes I'd write down things I wished my father had said. "You did well. You were brave." Instead, the only words that ever reached me were from command briefings: efficiency, protocol, silence. Years blurred together after that. Bases changed, faces changed, but the quiet between my parents and me stayed constant. On holidays, I sent postcards with neutral messages: "Happy Thanksgiving" from Kuwait, "Merry Christmas" from Doha. They never replied, but I imagined them lined up neatly on a refrigerator somewhere, evidence that I still existed. In 2019, during a debrief call, one of my commanding officers asked if my family was military too. I said yes out of habit, but the moment I said it, something inside me felt false, like I was impersonating a lineage that had already dismissed me. I didn't know then that this slow erasure would prepare me for what happened a decade later at Fort Bragg. The family tradition of silence had been drilled so deep it sounded like loyalty. I wore it like armor. I kept believing that one day, silence would be mistaken for respect. When I think back to that graduation photo now, I remember the detail I missed then. My mother's hand was resting lightly on my father's arm, her wedding ring catching the sun. Mine hung at my side, balled into a fist, just out of frame. I used to think that picture meant legacy. Now I know it was a warning. Family pride looks best when everyone holds still. I learned to salute absence. I drove the perimeter road that looped around Fort Bragg, the same route I had memorized years ago when I first trained here. The air shimmered with heat, the sound of a brass march faint but steady. Beyond the chain-link fence, the retirement ceremony was in full swing. White folding chairs lined the grass, ribbons fluttered against the poles, and the voices of officers carried easily through the humid air. From where I sat in the car, the whole scene looked like a staged photograph, perfect, rehearsed, sanitized. My father stood at the center, his silver hair catching the sunlight, his uniform still crisp enough to make a younger officer self-conscious. My mother hovered near the podium, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve, her face composed into what the family called the Whitlock smile. She had perfected it for years. I rolled the window down just enough to catch fragments of applause. The sound didn't sting, it hollowed. Every clap felt like punctuation on a story that had already written me out. I pulled over near a break in the trees where the fence bent toward the parking area. From there, I could see the stage directly. People laughed, shook hands, took photos. A young lieutenant in the second row lifted his phone, aiming for a group selfie with my father in the background. I recognized him instantly, Lieutenant James Avery. We'd gone through field training together 8 years ago, back when I still thought camaraderie could outlast rank. He looked almost the same, only more certain, more rooted. I watched him lower the phone, glance around, then check something on his screen. A second later, my phone buzzed. "Didn't know you weren't invited. They said you transferred overseas again." I stared at the message until the words blurred. Then I typed back, erased again. A long minute passed before his reply came. "You should be here." I didn't answer. My reflection in the windshield looked calm, but I felt the familiar tremor behind my ribs, the one that came before every mission briefing anticipation mixed with dread. It wasn't fear of danger. It was fear of recognition. Being seen meant being questioned, and in my family, questions were insubordination. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat. The glow from the screen lit the inside of the car, pale against the shadowed dash. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat waiting for direction. I started to type. The title came first without thought. The Daughter of Silence. My fingers moved faster than my mind. I described the morning exactly as it had happened, the sun on the brass instruments, the smell of cut grass, the sound of my mother's voice at the gate. I wrote about the way she said, "Go home," like she was issuing an order, not breaking a bond. I wrote about my father's eyes passing over me, about how silence could feel like exile when spoken by blood. I didn't name them. I didn't have to. The story wasn't about identity. It was about absence wearing a uniform. The words filled the screen quickly, paragraphs stacking like bricks. I paused once to watch the crowd again. My father was speaking now, gesturing toward his fellow officers, his voice rising and falling in the rhythm of ceremony. I knew that tone. I had inherited it. It was the sound of control disguised as honor. My mother dabbed at her eyes as the crowd laughed at something he said. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the patterned gratitude-duty legacy. There would be a mention of sacrifice, a pause for the national anthem, a handshake with command. None of it would acknowledge the daughter sitting outside the fence line. I returned to the keyboard. Every soldier learns that no one is irreplaceable. Families learn it too, though they never admit it. I described the moment my mother closed the door behind her, the polished brass handle catching light as she turned away. I wrote about the sound. The latch made a small click that somehow echoed louder than gunfire. By the time the ceremony music swelled for the final salute, I had finished the first draft. I read it once, adjusting only a few words. It wasn't angry, it was surgical, the kind of truth that cuts without leaving visible marks. I saved the file titled It Draft 01, The Daughter of Silence. Docs, and closed the laptop. The applause rose again from the field, followed by the rhythmic stomping of boots. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, letting the vibration of distant celebration run through me. I imagined walking up to the podium mid-ceremony, saying nothing, just handing my father the framed photo with the cracked glass. In another version of this day, he might have taken it, placed it beside his medals, and said my name. In reality, he would have paused, adjusted his posture, and continued the speech. That was the Whitlock way: proceed as planned, no matter what has been erased. My phone buzzed again. "James." "You okay?" I typed. "Define. Okay," he sent back. The colonel looked proud up there. "But I know he saw you." I didn't reply. Pride was a language I no longer understood. I started the car, the hum of the engine masking the closing notes of the ceremony. The last thing I saw before turning onto the main road was my father shaking hands with the commanding officer, his smile perfect, the crowd rising to their feet. They applauded the idea of a man, not the truth of him. I drove until the sound faded completely, until the banners and brass were only memory. At a red light near the edge of town, I opened my laptop again. The document waited quiet and alive. I hovered over the send button, the cursor blinking like it was daring me. Then I closed the lid. Not yet. Truth has better aim when it waits. Long before Fort Bragg and West Point, before ranks and salutes meant anything official, silence was already the language of our house in Fayetteville. The walls carried the same color as the barracks where my father worked, muted beige disciplined. Every photo was aligned to regulation height, every corner of the carpet tucked square. Even laughter seemed to ask permission before it entered a room. At dinner, the sound of the clock competed with the click of silverware. My father, still in uniform, even off duty, sat at the head of the table reading reports between bites. My mother ran the household like a base. The schedule was exact breakfast at 700 chores, by 900 quiet hours after 2100. She was the only person who could make him smile, though it never lasted long. Her authority was different from his. It came not from rank, but from the unspoken threat of disappointment. When she looked at you, you either stood straighter or vanished. My earliest memory of failing her was a summer afternoon when I was 8. My father had just returned from a short deployment, and my mother wanted the perfect welcome. She rehearsed us like soldiers. Ethan and I had to stand on the front step, wave our small flags, and salute on cue. The car pulled into the driveway, dust curling around the tires. My brother's hand shot up in a crisp salute, but I hesitated, nervous and off balance. The flag slipped from my fingers. My mother's face changed instantly. Later, after the greetings and the dinner, she called me into the hallway. Her voice was soft, her hand not. The slap wasn't hard enough to bruise, but it landed with surgical precision. "A Whitlock doesn't embarrass the uniform," she said. The sentence lodged somewhere deep, heavier than the sting. I didn't cry. Crying was noise, and noise broke formation. From then on, I studied her expressions like field maps, learning the terrain of what pleased her, what didn't. Ethan adjusted faster. He had my father's easy confidence, the kind that seemed to earn forgiveness before mistakes even happened. When he knocked over a glass or came home late, she sighed and called it carelessness. When I forgot to fold my laundry by 1800, it was discipline. My father rarely intervened. He called it structure, said it would make me stronger. But I understood early that strength in our family was measured by silence, not resilience. The first time I realized love had rules was during one of my father's promotion ceremonies. I must have been 12. My mother picked out matching outfits for us, navy skirts, white blouses, hair braided tight. She inspected me before we left, smoothing invisible wrinkles, pulling my shoulders back. "You represent him," she said. We stood beside her during the ceremony, smiling on cue hands, clasped the perfect portrait of loyalty. When a reporter asked for a photo, my father placed his hand on my brother's shoulder. His other hand rested lightly on my mother's back. I was cropped halfway in the final picture, the caption reading, "The Whitlock family celebrates another milestone." I remember staring at that photo later, the edge of my arm cut off, thinking, maybe that was what belonging looked like, almost included, never centered. By the time I was in high school, the house felt less like home and more like a waiting room for inspection. Every achievement was a box to tick, every failure a mark to erase. My mother hung my report cards on the fridge, not as praise, but as evidence. When guests came over, she would gesture at them with pride, saying, "Dana's grades are excellent." Then she'd add, "Of course we expect nothing less." Praise always came with a leash. My father's presence was measured in footsteps down the hall, the weight of boots stopping by my door, then moving on. He didn't speak much unless it was about school or the military. When I mentioned art or literature, he'd say, "The world doesn't need dreamers in uniform." My mother would smile in agreement, and I would shrink a little more inside the frame of their expectations. There was one night storm outside, power flickering, when I thought I saw something different in them. We were eating by candlelight, the air thick with rain. My father told a story about his first days as a recruit, about the officer who taught him how to keep standing when every muscle wanted to quit. My mother laughed softly, the sound warm, for once real. For a moment, I imagined they might look at me and see someone worth including in that memory. Then the lights came back on, and the moment vanished like static cleared from a radio. My mother pushed back her chair, collected the dishes, and said, "Bedtime, Dana." The tone snapped the warmth in half. Years later, during cadet training at West Point, instructors would shout, "Discipline is love." I remember thinking I've heard that before. When I left for the academy, my mother hugged me at the door, stiff and efficient. "You'll make us proud," she said. There was no goodbye, just expectation. My father saluted me. It was the last gesture he ever gave that resembled affection. Looking back, I can see how the silence that defined our home wasn't accidental. It was inherited, refined like a family heirloom. We carried it from generation to generation, polishing it until it looked like respect. In the Whitlock house, affection wasn't spoken, it was measured. Obedience was the currency of love, and love itself was just another order waiting to be carried out. The road from Fort Bragg to downtown Fayetteville cut through fields that looked the same as they had when I was a child, flat, sun-baked, and humming with insects. The farther I drove, the smaller the ceremony felt behind me, just another event swallowed by the distance. I stopped at a small coffee shop I used to visit before deployments, a quiet place with mismatched chairs and a jukebox that never worked. The barista recognized the uniform and offered a discount I didn't ask for. I sat by the window with a cup of black coffee, the kind that burned a little on the way down, and opened my phone out of habit. The first thing that appeared was a photo from the ceremony. My father stood at the podium, his hand raised in a formal gesture, a folded flag presented to him by command. On one side of him was my mother, her hair perfectly set pearls glowing under the afternoon light. On the other stood my brother Ethan, now in logistics. The caption read, "Family Pride." The image was framed beautifully, the proud colonel, the loyal wife, the son in service. Complete symmetry. I stared at it long enough for the screen to dim. The coffee cooled, untouched. I enlarged the picture until I could see the edge of the crowd behind them. Somewhere off frame was the spot where I had stood outside the fence. The symmetry of it was perfect, and that was the cruelty. My phone buzzed with a message from James Avery. "You still around base?" I typed back. "Downtown." "Coffee shop." A pause. Then, "You saw the photo?" "Yeah." Another pause. Didn't think they'd post it that fast. I scrolled through the comments, old friends from the base officers' neighbors. A legacy of service. The Whitlocks never disappoint. Beautiful family. Proud to have served under the colonel. Each line tightened the same place in my chest. The world saw a family united by duty. Only I knew what silence cost to keep that illusion clean. I saved the photo, cropped it until only their 3 faces remained, and sent it to James. "Pride looks quiet from the outside." His reply came a minute later. "You should tell your side." I watched the text blink, then fade. The phrase repeated in my head until it felt heavier than the coffee mug in my hand. Tell your side. In the Army, every report has sides: friendly, hostile, neutral. But families pretend there's only one. The cafe filled slowly with the afternoon crowd. 2 veterans at the counter were discussing the ceremony, their voices carrying easily. One said, "The colonel still stands tall after all these years. You can tell the family's proud." I wondered what pride looked like up close to them. Did it have edges, or was it soft and blinding? Outside sunlight shifted through the window blinds, cutting the room into stripes of gold and shadow. My reflection stared back at me, uniform, neat posture, straight expression unreadable. Exactly how they had raised me to look. I opened my laptop, the same one that still held the draft of The Daughter of Silence. The words waited there, crisp black on white patient. I scrolled through the paragraphs again, rereading what I had written about that morning at the gate. The voice in those lines didn't sound angry, it sounded surgical, like an analyst dissecting evidence. That was how I had learned to survive, even in writing remove emotion, keep the facts. But this wasn't intelligence data. It was memory, and memory doesn't obey orders. I hovered over the publish option again, the blue button glowing faintly on the screen. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past its reflection, dragging light across the glass. In that moment, I realized how easy it would be to vanish completely. No confrontation, no explanation, just quiet compliance. That was what my family counted on. I took another sip of coffee, bitter and grounding, and looked again at the photo. Ethan's hand rested on my father's shoulder. My mother's eyes were lifted toward him, her expression one of perfect devotion. I couldn't remember the last time any of them had looked at me that way. My phone buzzed again. A message from James. You don't owe them silence. I smiled a little at the irony. He had no idea how much silence was inherited. In the Whitlock family, silence wasn't avoidance. It was armor polished over decades. Still, his words left a mark. I minimized the window, opened a blank document, and began typing a few sentences that weren't meant for anyone but me. If pride is built on omission, is it still pride or just theater? If truth costs a family, is it betrayal or rescue? The cursor blinked after each question waiting, like it expected me to answer. I didn't. Instead, I saved the new file in the same folder as the old one. The names lined up neatly, Draft 01, Draft 02, a lineage of restraint. The veterans at the counter laughed at something, and one of them said, "People like the Colonel, they don't make them like that anymore." I closed the laptop and stared at the reflection of the three faces on my phone screen. They didn't make daughters like me anymore either. I opened the message thread with James one last time and typed, "Maybe someday. Not today." Then I locked the phone and slid it face down on the table. Outside, the flags along Hay Street fluttered lazily in the wind, their reflections catching in the coffee shop's glass like ripples of memory. For a moment, I imagined walking back to the base, interrupting whatever after-party they were having and saying everything that had stayed locked behind years of measured silence. Instead, I folded the napkin beside my cup into a perfect square the way my mother taught me and left it on the table. The lesson was old, but still intact. Control the details, even when everything else is chaos. I walked out into the fading sunlight, the hum of downtown mixing with the echo of the ceremony still lingering in my mind. My phone stayed quiet, but the thought didn't. You should tell your side. I wasn't sure if it was encouragement or a challenge. Maybe both. Maybe that's what truth always sounds like before it's spoken. Would you have hit Publish Baghdad 2020? The desert heat didn't cool after sundown, it only shifted, pressing down from the ceiling instead of the sky. The intelligence unit worked out of a converted government building, all concrete walls and humming generators. I had been awake for 20 hours, sorting intercepted transmissions, when the message came through the secure network. My father had been hospitalized back home, hypertension. Nothing fatal, but enough for command to notify me as next of kin. The email was clinical detached. There was no note from my mother, no subject line that said he asked for you. I read it twice, expecting to feel panic, but instead there was only the old ache of distance, the reflex to make myself smaller around news that didn't include me. That night, I sat at my bunk, the room dim except for the low light of a desk lamp, and began to write a letter. Dear Dad. I started, then stopped. I had never called him that on paper before. It felt too soft, almost disobedient. I tried again. Colonel Whitlock, I wrote because formality was safer. I told him I was sorry for not being there. Sorry for not being the kind of daughter he could point to without hesitation. I wrote about the missions, about the nights that blurred together under sirens, about learning to lead teams of men who didn't think a woman should be the one giving orders. I said I hoped he would be proud anyway. The words came haltingly awkward, as if I were filing an official report on something that couldn't be measured. I ended it with a promise I'll make you proud before this tour ends. When I sealed the letter, I realized there was no address that made sense. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a silence spread across continents. I folded the envelope and tucked it inside my jacket pocket, intending to send it the next day, but I didn't. The next day bled into the next week, and life on base moved the way it always did without pause. Information briefings, patrol schedules, new directives, endless alerts. The letter became a habit, a weight I carried on my chest, a reminder that apology was easy to write but impossible to deliver. 3 months later, an email arrived from my mother. No greeting, no sentiment. Focus on duty, not family politics. That was it. 6 words that folded the distance even wider. I reread them until the glow of the screen blurred into static. My roommate, Sergeant Lang, asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. I had said that so often it had become a password. That same night, just past 0200, the sirens tore through the compound. A transport vehicle had struck an IED on the North Road, and the blast had knocked out part of our perimeter wall. The building shook dust falling like rain. Training overrode thought. I grabbed my gear and ran toward the smoke. 3 of my team were down pinned near the wreckage. I don't remember thinking. Only movement. Only the noise of shrapnel biting into the ground around us and the smell of burning metal. I crawled under the frame, dragging the first soldier free, then another. The third was bleeding badly conscious but fading. His hand gripped mine with the kind of desperation that doesn't need language. I kept talking to him words I can't even remember until we reached cover. Later, medics said the truck could have gone up again any second. I only remember the silence afterward, the strange stillness that follows chaos when you realize you're still alive and someone else is because of it. At dawn, command called it a successful extraction under fire. They said I showed initiative and composure. 2 weeks later, I received notice of a Bronze Star recommendation. The medal arrived with the efficiency of military mail, a commendation that glinted in the desert sun like proof that I had done something right. I placed it on my bunk beside the unopened letter. It looked strange there, honor beside apology medal beside paper. One was permanent, the other never sent. I thought about writing home again, about telling them what had happened, but I already knew the response it would draw. Good work, Captain. Stay safe. That was how love translated in our language performance reviews. The letter remained folded in my pocket for the rest of the tour, the edges softening with wear ink fading under the friction of armor plates. By the time I rotated back to the States, I couldn't remember the exact words I had written, only the feeling that they had been the truest ones I'd ever put down. But truth, like everything else in the Whitlock family, required the right timing, and timing never arrived. Sometimes I would catch myself touching the pocket where the letter used to be, as if it might still anchor me to the version of him who might have cared. Instead, it became a relic, a proof of intent, not connection. When the Bronze Star was pinned on my uniform at Fort Hood later that year, a photographer asked if I wanted to include family in the picture. I said no. The metal gleamed bright against the fabric, heavy enough to feel earned, but not heavy enough to fill what was missing. I mailed a copy of the ceremony photo to my parents anyway, unsigned, uncaptioned. 2 weeks later, the same envelope came back marked, "Return to Sender." I didn't open it. I slipped it into the same drawer as the medal and the unmailed letter, a small archive of conversations that would never happen. Sometimes, late at night, I'd unfold the letter just to see the handwriting the way my own name looked when written for him. It wasn't forgiveness I wanted. It was recognition. Even in the desert, surrounded by chaos, I still believed that someday silence might finally answer. Until then, I carried the letter with me tucked close to my chest, just under the medal. 2 kinds of proof pressed together, the one they gave me and the one I gave myself. That night, Fayetteville felt like a city waiting to exhale. The air outside my apartment was still thick with summer heat, the kind that pressed against your skin until breathing felt like effort. I hadn't spoken to anyone since the ceremony. My uniform hung on the back of a chair, the Bronze Star ribbon dull under the yellow lamp. The framed photo from years ago, the cracked one I had meant to give my father, leaned against the wall. The silence in the room felt rehearsed, like every pause in my family's conversations, like every unreturned letter. I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on an empty page, the same heartbeat I'd seen 100 times before when writing reports for the Army. This time, there was no header, no classification, no command seal, just words and the weight behind them. I began with light. The way the sun hit the base that morning, reflecting off the brass band's instruments, how the air smelled faintly of grass and formality. I wrote about the gate, about the list my mother held in her manicured hands, about the words that sounded more like an order than rejection. "You're not invited, Dana. Go home." I wrote about the pause after that sentence, the silence that stretched like a line of command neither of us dared to cross. I described my father's eyes, steady, distant, unblinking. I wrote it all exactly as it happened. No names, no ranks, no photographs, only the precision of truth. The story built itself in clean, clipped paragraphs. Years of intelligence reporting had taught me how to remove emotion and focus on observation. But halfway through, my hands started to shake. The more I typed, the more I realized that detachment had been the family's real training all along. I ended the piece with a single sentence. In combat, silence means survival. In families, it means exile. I read it 3 times, checking for breaches of protocol for anything that might identify me or the base. Nothing did. It was just a story. The truth rendered sterile. I titled it The Daughter of Silence and saved it to a new folder. Midnight bled into morning. Outside, the streetlights flickered over the cracked pavement. I stared at the blue publish button, feeling the same surge I had felt before Mission's fear laced with clarity. My finger hovered over the trackpad, and for once there was no commanding voice to stop me. I clicked. For a moment, nothing happened. The page refreshed, the headline appeared, and the quiet returned. I closed the laptop, convinced it would vanish into the noise of the internet, just another anonymous confession drifting through algorithms. I went to bed without checking it again. 6 hours later, the sound of my phone woke me. It wasn't one notification, it was a cascade. The screen glowed with messages, alerts, mentions. The headline had found its way to Medium's front page under featured essays. Someone had shared it to Twitter with the caption, "This one hurts to read." Then someone else added the hashtag military daughters. By sunrise, it was trending. The comments poured in faster than I could scroll. I was her once. Tradition isn't love. My father was a Marine. He taught me silence, too. We wear the same uniform, but not the same acceptance. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Some were from women in uniform, others from daughters and wives of servicemen, and a few from veterans themselves who admitted they'd done the same thing to their own families. The words folded over one another, building a chorus I hadn't known existed. It felt like hearing an echo in a canyon I thought was empty. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt something heavier: recognition. My inbox filled with interview requests from small publications, then larger ones. Most messages asked the same question. Is this based on a real family? I didn't reply. The article didn't need names. The truth didn't need witnesses. By mid-morning, James Avery texted, "You wrote it, didn't you?" I stared at the screen before answering. "What makes you think that?" The line about silence. "You've said that before. Maybe a lot of people have." "Maybe, but you said it first." I didn't respond. I opened the article again, scrolling through the comment section. Someone had written, "Families call it honor when they mean control." Another said, "If truth costs you blood, it was never family to begin with." I closed the laptop, sat back, and tried to steady my breathing. It wasn't just about me anymore. The post had become something else, something collective. It wasn't vengeance, it was exposure. The kind that doesn't destroy, but illuminates. Around noon, a journalist from a defense magazine sent a direct message. "We'd like to republish your essay with permission. Anonymity guaranteed." I typed, "Not yet," and hit send. My mother's voice replayed in my head. "You're not invited." It sounded smaller now, swallowed by 1,000 voices saying, "Me too." I stood and walked to the window. The street below buzzed with life cars passing kids on bikes, a mail truck stopping 2 doors down. Normal. I wondered if anyone there had read it yet, if any of them would ever connect it to the quiet woman living alone on the second floor, the one who saluted shadows instead of people. My phone buzzed again. "James, you stirred something big." "Did I?" "You did. But be careful. The Colonel's name might surface." I looked at the message for a long time. Then I replied, "I didn't name him." They did. That afternoon, the story crossed 1 million views. Readers shared screenshots of their favorite lines, turning them into digital postcards. Silence wears medals too. Some traditions deserve retirement more than the men who built them. In families like ours, love has a chain of command. Each quote was mine, but each echo belonged to someone else now. That was the strange thing about truth. It multiplied once released. When the sun began to set, I stepped onto the balcony, the light fading over the rooftops. Somewhere across town, I imagined my parents sitting down to dinner. My father adjusting his watch, my mother arranging plates in perfect symmetry, unaware that the silence they had trained me to obey was now speaking louder than they ever had. I didn't feel revenge. I felt clarity. For once, the truth had no rank, no uniform, no chain of command. Just freedom, raw and unclassified. The phone vibrated one last time before I went inside. A message from an unknown number read, "You're not alone." I didn't need to ask who sent it. The whole world had already answered. Ever been erased by your own family? By morning, the silence I had unleashed had a chain of command of its own. It traveled faster than any classified transmission I'd ever handled. By sunrise, the article had reached every corner of the military network. Screens in offices, tablets in lounges, phones in cafeterias, everywhere. Someone served, someone read it. The essay had slipped past the barrier between private shame and public protocol, and when things reach the public command reacts. Around 0900 Colonel Richard Whitlock. My father received a call from the Public Affairs Division. The officer on the other end kept his tone polite, bureaucratic. "Sir, we need clarification on a story circulating online. It appears to describe a recent retirement ceremony here at Fort Bragg. Several readers are speculating it's about you." There was a pause long enough to register on a clock. "We'd like your confirmation before this escalates." My father's voice, as I would later learn from James, remained steady. "No comment," he said. The call ended there. But no comment in this military doesn't end anything. It starts a chain reaction. Within hours, the base PR team issued a quiet directive to monitor social channels and flag any post referencing the daughter of silence. It didn't take long before someone matched Timeline's geography and a handful of familiar faces. The conclusion was inevitable. The Whitlocks of Fort Bragg had become a parable. At home, my mother read the essay too. She didn't finish it, not at first. According to Ethan, she made it halfway through before recognizing her own phrasing in one of the lines. The article quoted the sentence I'd grown up hearing: "A Whitlock doesn't embarrass the uniform." She froze, he said. Then she turned the laptop toward my father, her voice low and sharp. "It's her. Who else would write this?" My father didn't answer. He simply adjusted his glasses and stared at the screen, the reflection of the text flickering across his face. The silence between them stretched the same silence that had raised me. Finally, she said, "You have to call them. You have to tell them she's lying." He didn't move. She didn't use names, he said quietly. "Then deny it anyway," she snapped. "People will assume it's us. She's jealous, unstable. You know how she's always been." Ethan, who was standing in the doorway, tried to intervene, but my mother cut him off. "Don't defend her. You saw what she did." My father looked up, his expression unreadable. "What she did," he said slowly, "was tell a story." That sentence hung in the air like a confession. My mother stood frozen, her face pale, before retreating to the kitchen, where she always went to regain control. She made coffee that no one drank. The phone rang again, reporters, acquaintances, old colleagues wanting comment or comfort or gossip. The colonel said nothing. He went to his office, closed the door, and stayed there for hours. By afternoon, the base command requested a private briefing. PR officers drafted potential responses, all vague. The Army values the privacy of all service families. They didn't want scandal. They wanted containment. But containment never works when truth already has an audience. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from James Avery. I hesitated before answering. "You stirred a hornet's nest," he said without preamble. His voice was low, half admiring, half worried. "Public Affairs is scrambling." The colonel refused to comment, but everyone knows. I stepped onto my balcony, looking out over the parking lot below, where heat shimmered off the cars. "They built it," I said. "I just turned on the light." He exhaled, the sound rough. "You realize they'll come after you, right? Maybe not officially, but quietly. Reputation is currency here." "So is truth," I said, "and I was bankrupt long before this." "Dana," his voice softened. "Are you okay? I'm not sure that word applies anymore." We both fell silent. Somewhere in the background of his call, I could hear faint office noise. Phones ringing, printers whirring, the pulse of the system trying to self-correct. "They're calling this a breach of decorum," he said finally. "Not of security, but of image." "Same thing in this family," I said. "In ours too." He hesitated. "Your father looked different today. Not angry, just old." That image stayed with me long after the call ended. My father at his desk, staring at a world he couldn't control for the first time. For decades, he'd been the man who decided what version of reality his subordinates followed. Now, the truth had outranked him. At 1600, a base newsletter quietly circulated an internal note. Reminder online commentary about military personnel and their families must uphold the integrity of service values. It was regulation disguised as reprimand. That evening, my mother left 3 voicemails. The first was clipped. "You've embarrassed your father." The second cracked slightly around the edges. "People are calling. What do I tell them?" The third was softer, almost pleading. "Take it down, Dana, please." I didn't answer any of them. Around 1900, Ethan texted, "They're panicking. Dad's not saying much. You might want to call." I typed back, "There's nothing to say that hasn't been said." I could picture them around the dinner table, the empty chair where I used to sit, the silence filling it like smoke. For years, they'd built their peace on omission. I had simply written the truth down. At 2200, a new headline appeared online. "Anonymous military daughter's essay sparks debate on family honor and duty." Beneath it was a photo from an old retirement ceremony, my father's, the one that started it all. The caption didn't mention names, but it didn't need to. Everyone who mattered already knew. By midnight, my inbox overflowed again. Some messages were kind, others cruel. "You ruined a man's reputation. Thank you for writing what we couldn't say." My mother did the same thing to me. Each one was a reminder that truth doesn't stay neat once released. It spreads, touches everything it was meant to expose. I turned off the notifications and sat in the dark, the hum of the bass still faint in the distance. Somewhere across town, my father was probably sitting in his office, the phone still ringing, the lines of command blurring under the weight of what he couldn't deny. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel pride either. Just inevitability. Families like ours are built on silence until someone speaks. And once the first word is out, nothing you say after matters. The invitation came in the same way every confrontation in my family did, formal, sterile, and wrapped in the illusion of civility. An email subject line, family discussion, private, no greeting, no explanation. Just a time and an address: my parents' house in Fayetteville. Sunday, 1800 hours. It read more like a summons than an invitation. For a few hours I stared at it, debating whether to go. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the silence they'd chosen consume itself. But curiosity, or maybe discipline, won out. Soldiers respond to calls even when they know the ambush is waiting. The house looked smaller than I remembered, maybe because I'd grown, or maybe because truth had stripped it of its authority. The porch light glowed like an interrogation lamp. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She wore a pressed blouse, pearls, and that same expression she always used when trying to look composed in chaos. My father stood behind her, stiff as ever, hands behind his back, eyes unreadable. Ethan leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, jaw tense. "Dana," my mother set her voice tight, "we need to talk about what you've done." She didn't offer a seat. I stepped inside anyway, the familiar smell of furniture polish and coffee instantly choking me with memory. The living room looked exactly as it always had. Family photos in perfect symmetry, medals gleaming under glass, a framed American flag hanging above the mantel like a silent judge. I took a seat on the edge of the couch. "You made us a spectacle," she began. "You humiliated your father in front of his peers, in front of the entire base. Do you understand what that does to a man's reputation?" I kept my eyes on her, calm. "I didn't mention his name." "You didn't have to," she snapped. "Everyone knows. People are calling. They think we're monsters." "I didn't make anyone think that," I said quietly. "I just told the truth." Her eyes hardened. "Truth. You call betrayal truth. You've destroyed 35 years of service, Dana. 35 years. She turned toward my father, looking for backup. "Say something, Richard." He didn't. His gaze stayed fixed on the floor, as if the wood grain might offer a strategy. The silence between us pulsed with all the words he had never said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded envelope yellowed around the edges. The handwriting on the front was his clean, precise, the kind of script drilled into him from years of reports and commands. I held it out. "You wrote this to me 10 years ago," I said. "You never sent it." My mother frowned. "What is that?" "A letter," I said, unfolding it. He apologized for not being there. Said he didn't know how to bridge the gap. Said he hoped I'd forgive him someday. My father's eyes flickered, but he stayed silent. He knew I continued. "You all did. You just pretended not to." My mother stepped forward, shaking her head. "You forged that." "Don't you dare! It's his signature," I said. "Same one on every certificate hanging on that wall." Her face flushed red, and for a second I thought she might actually cry. Instead, she raised her hand and slapped me across the face. The sound cracked through the air like a rifle report. My head tilted slightly with the impact, but I didn't flinch. Years of training had taught me how to absorb a hit without showing damage. Ethan grabbed her wrist before she could do it again. "Mom, stop," he said, pulling her back. "Enough. She's tearing this family apart," my mother shouted. "She's the reason your father can't even show his face at the officers' club." "He can still show it," I said evenly. "He just doesn't get to hide behind it anymore." My father looked up then, just for a moment. Our eyes met. For the first time, I didn't see command in his face. I saw something worse, fear. "You think you've done something noble," my mother hissed. "But all you've done is disgrace us." I stood smoothing my jacket. "You call it disgrace. I call it daylight." My voice didn't rise, but the stillness in the room shifted. Ethan looked between us, torn. "Maybe she's right," he said quietly. My mother spun toward him. "Don't you start." "No," he said louder this time. "Maybe she's right. We've all been pretending this house was something it isn't." The words landed heavy. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "Enough," he said. His voice was firm but hollow. "This discussion is over." "It always is," I said. "That's the problem." I picked up the letter, folded it neatly, and slipped it back into my bag. My mother stood rigid, breathing hard, her pearls trembling against her neck. My father stared past me, through me. The man who had once commanded battalions couldn't even command a sentence. I walked toward the door, every step measured. At the threshold, I turned back. "You don't get to call it family," I said, "when you silence half of it." No one moved. No one spoke. Behind me, the flag above the mantel seemed to sag slightly in its frame, the weight of false honor finally too heavy. Outside, the evening air hit cool against my skin, the faint hum of crickets replacing the tension still echoing behind the door. I reached my car, sat for a long moment, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The red mark on my cheek was faint now, but visible. Proof. Not of pain, but of survival. I thought of the letter again, the one I'd found in my father's old desk years ago when cleaning out the guest room. I'd never understood why he wrote it and never sent it. Now I did. He was afraid of confrontation, afraid that words might undo the myth he'd spent his life building. For him, silence was control. For me, silence had become a wound that finally stopped bleeding the moment I spoke. The porch light behind me flickered once, then went out. I started the engine and drove off without looking back. The road stretched empty ahead, no destination, just distance. Somewhere, deep in that house, I imagined my father sitting again in his office, the letter's absence finally noticed. Maybe he'd think about what I said. Maybe he wouldn't. But for the first time, that wasn't my responsibility. The silence was theirs to keep now, not mine. By Monday morning, the story wasn't just an online sensation, it had become a whisper, moving through the veins of the military itself. At Fort Bragg, conversation shifted from deployments and training rotations to that essay. In mess halls, over coffee stations, between field briefings, people spoke in coded fragments, lowering their voices like the words were contraband. "You read it. They say it's someone here. It's too specific not to be." No one said my name, but no one needed to. The base rumor mill had its own intelligence network, one more efficient than anything I'd ever worked on officially. What started as gossip grew into something else, a reckoning. Especially among the women. Within days, private chat groups and internal message boards filled with confessions that sounded hauntingly familiar. I was told to smile more during my promotion photo. My CO said women shouldn't lead recon units. My husband said my rank makes him feel small. Each story echoed the same undertone silence mistaken for respect. Tradition used as a leash. Some messages came from people I'd never met, others from women I had trained with years ago. They didn't say my name, but they called me her, the daughter of silence. The phrase spread like a code word, a quiet anthem. It wasn't defiance, it was recognition. One afternoon, while I was reviewing reports at my apartment, an email arrived from a small but respected online military journal called The Service Line. The subject read, "Request for anonymous interview, the daughter of silence." The body of the message was polite, direct. "We believe your essay has opened an important conversation about gender hierarchy and silence within military families. We'd like to feature your perspective in an anonymous interview. You may approve all final content." I stared at it for a long time. The word anonymous flickered like a lifeline. I replied, "Yes. I'll speak, but not as a daughter, as a soldier." They sent the questions within the hour. Most were straightforward. Why did you write it? What do you hope changes? Do you fear repercussions? My answers came easily precise and measured. Years of writing field reports had trained me to remove excess emotion, but this time I allowed small cracks to show. I wrote it because silence has rank, because some wounds don't bleed, they just echo. The editor thanked me, promising the piece would publish the following week. I didn't expect what came next. That evening, James Avery called. "They've opened an internal inquiry," he said quietly. "Not official, just exploratory. Command wants to know who wrote the essay." I felt a pulse of cold adrenaline. "And they picked you to lead it." "Yeah." He admitted, his voice low. "Public Affairs requested it. They want to check comms activity from personnel tied to the base. So you'll find me in about 5 minutes," I said. "If I wanted to," he replied. I could hear the hesitation in his tone. "You won't," I said. It wasn't a question. He sighed. "Dana, this is bad optics. They don't care if it's true. They just care it embarrassed command. And your father's name is all over the internal chatter." "He's not the one they should be worried about," I said. "It's the system that let it happen. You think truth and policy live in the same house," he said, half a laugh, half a warning. "They don't. I've worked both doors." "Then maybe it's time someone knocked on both." There was silence on the line, the kind that used to mean something between us back when we were both younger, less exhausted by the institution we still served. Finally, he said, "For what it's worth. I'm proud of you." I smiled faintly. "You don't even know it's me." "Sure I do. The way you write, it's like you're filing a report but hoping someone finally reads between the lines." He was right. We hadn't spoken in years before this, but he still recognized the cadence of my words. He'd been in my unit once back in Germany. We'd shared long debrief nights and early patrol mornings talking about everything except the things that mattered most. "I'll keep your name off the records," he said. "But Dana, you need to be careful. Command doesn't like when narratives escape their perimeter." "Maybe they should build better fences," I said softly. He chuckled, but it sounded tired. "You haven't changed." "Neither have they," I replied. "That's the problem." After the call, I sat in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt strategic, like waiting for the next move. 2 days later, the service line published the interview. The headline read, "Inside the Mind of the Soldier Who Shook the Silence." The author remained unnamed. The article spread across forums, then into larger outlets. The responses were immediate, divided. Some readers called it brave overdue. Others called it insubordination disguised as therapy. But beneath the noise, a new conversation had begun, one that wasn't about me or my father, but about what it meant to serve a system that demanded obedience from both the battlefield and the dinner table. James texted the next day. "Command is pretending not to know. That's their version of damage control." "Good," I replied. "Let them choke on their silence for once." He sent back a single line. "You'd make a hell of a general." I laughed quietly, the kind that stings more than it soothes. The next morning, I woke to find new messages in my inbox, women thanking me, officers admitting they'd forwarded the essay to their daughters' cadets, saying it made them want to stay in uniform for different reasons. One line stood out. "For the first time, I feel seen." I closed my eyes and let that sentence settle inside me. It wasn't victory, not yet. but it was proof that silence could be broken without shouting. That night, James called again, his tone lighter. So he said, "What now?" "Captain," I smiled into the receiver. "Now I wait." "For what?" "For the system to realize it's not just my story anymore." There was a pause. "And when that happens, then maybe," I said, "the silence will finally have to answer." A week later, truth found its way into daylight again, but this time it came with pictures. I woke to my phone vibrating nonstop, the kind of urgent rhythm that never means anything good. My group chat's email, even my old Army signal threads, all filled with one link. The headline read, "Leaked footage from Fort Bragg retirement ceremony sparks online outrage." I hesitated before tapping it, knowing instinctively what I'd see. The video opened mid-frame, grainy phone camera quality. The sound of the military band played faintly in the background, the camera panning toward the main gate. There I was in full uniform, standing outside the fence. My mother-perfect posture pearls glinting under sunlight stepped forward. The audio wasn't perfect, but her words were clear enough to make my stomach tighten. "You're not invited, Dana. Go home." Behind her, my father adjusted his watch eyes, fixed anywhere but on me. Then I turned, walked away, the camera shaking slightly as the person filming gasped. Someone muttered, "That's her daughter." The clip ended there. 8 seconds. That was all it took. 8 seconds to turn private humiliation into public evidence. Within hours, it had been reposted thousands of times. Comments flooded every platform. "Who treats their daughter like that? This family doesn't deserve medals. Honor starts at home." This is why she wrote the essay. The internet had done what the Army never could. It held a mirror up to power and forced everyone to look. Every outlet from small military blogs to mainstream news picked it up. "Anonymous military writer's story confirmed by leaked video," one headline said. Another went further. "Colonel Whitlock's family faces backlash amid viral controversy." My name still wasn't public, but anonymity was dissolving like sugar in hot coffee. By afternoon, the footage had reached national news. Commentators debated whether family matters should stay private, whether the daughter of silence was justified, whether truth could justify exposure. I didn't comment. I didn't have to. The truth was already speaking. At 8:43 p.m., my phone rang. My mother. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Her voice came sharp, frantic, stripped of her usual control. "You need to take it down, Dana. Right now." I almost laughed. "You think I posted it?" "Don't play games," she snapped. "You know exactly what this looks like. They're saying terrible things about your father. About me. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our reputation?" I kept my tone calm. "Mom, that video existed long before it went public. The only difference now is people saw it. People don't need to know everything she said, her breath quick and shallow. Some things should stay within the family." "You mean secrets," I said. "You mean silence." "Don't twist my words," she hissed. "This isn't justice, Dana. This is cruelty." I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the faint glow of the city lights outside. "You taught me to stand by what I write," I said softly. "You used to tell me that words define character." "This isn't about character," she snapped. "It's about dignity." "Dignity doesn't hide behind gates," I said. There was a pause, the line crackling with static. I could almost hear her trying to compose herself the way she always did before public events, breathing in control, exhaling presentation. "You've humiliated us," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Your father hasn't eaten in 2 days. He won't even leave his office. I hope you're proud." I closed my eyes. "Pride isn't the word," I said quietly. "But maybe honesty is." "You've destroyed everything he worked for," she said. "Everything this family stood for." "Then maybe it wasn't worth standing for," I whispered. "Good night, Mom." "Dana, don't hang." Click. The line went dead. For a while, I just sat there staring at the phone, the silence stretching like smoke. Outside, rain had started to fall light at first, then steadier. The drops pattered against the window, blurring the reflection of my own face. I thought about the ceremony again, how I'd stood there frozen while my mother delivered her command like a public sentence. Back then, silence had felt like survival. Now it was proof. The next morning I drove past Fort Bragg. News vans were parked near the main gate. Reporters waited with cameras hoping for a glimpse of the colonel or his family. Soldiers hurried past heads down, avoiding eye contact. I parked across the street engine, idling, and watched. The banner that had once hung above the entrance, honoring 35 years of service. Colonel Richard Whitlock was gone. Only the rope remained frayed and swinging in the wind. By noon, the Army issued an official statement. The U.S. Army does not condone personal harassment or discrimination and values the dignity of all service members and their families. The language was careful neutral, a polished way of saying nothing while pretending to say everything, James Avery texted later that day. So the world saw the gate. Yeah, I replied. Guess they needed proof. You okay? Depends what you mean by okay. They'll never admit it, but commands quietly reviewing family conduct policies now. Good, I typed. It's overdue. There was a long pause before he sent one last message. You changed something, Dana, even if they pretend you didn't. I didn't answer. I just sat on the couch watching the rain taper off the streets glistening under the dim light. Somewhere in the noise of the city, I imagined my father listening to the same broadcast, hearing the words Colonel Whitlock paired with controversy for the first time in his life. I wondered what he felt, anger, regret, or just the exhaustion of maintaining silence too long. That night, I received another message from an unknown number. It's out now. You don't have to explain anymore. No signature, no clue. Maybe another soldier. Maybe a stranger who recognized the truth in 8 seconds of footage. I turned off the lights, sat in the dark, and let the quiet return. For the first time, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like confirmation. The truth had finally outranked tradition. 2 days after the video, my father collapsed in his study. Ethan was the one who called, his voice clipped and urgent. He's in the hospital, high blood pressure. They said it was stress. I didn't ask from what. We both knew. Fayetteville Memorial wasn't far, but the drive felt endless. The city moved too slowly, the red lights too long, as if the world had conspired to drag me towards something I didn't want to face. When I arrived, the lobby smelled of disinfectant and exhaustion. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and unforgiving. At the end of the hallway, I saw her, my mother, pacing, clutching her purse like a weapon. The moment her eyes met mine, her face hardened. You did this, she said, before I could speak. Her voice cut through the sterile air, sharp enough to draw stares from nearby nurses. You broke him, Dana. Are you proud now? I stood still. I didn't make him read the comments I said quietly, or believe them. You humiliated him, she hissed. The entire base is whispering. They stripped him of his dignity and you handed them the knife. I handed them the truth, I said. He decided what to do with it. You've destroyed this family, she said, her voice shaking now, anger collapsing into something closer to panic. Your father's reputation, his peace, gone. All because you couldn't keep your resentment private. Private, I repeated. You mean hidden. You mean buried like everything else. Her eyes burned. How dare you speak to me like that in this place? I glanced past her toward the glass doors of the emergency ward. Through them, I could see the red glow of the ER sign reflecting against the hallway wall, pulsing with each rotation of the ceiling light inside. It painted everything the color of alarm. My brother emerged a moment later, looking older than he had 2 days ago. They're stabilizing him, he said. He's awake, but they're keeping him overnight. My mother gripped his arm. Don't let her in there, she said. Not after what she's done. Ethan looked at me, torn. Mom, she doesn't belong here, she snapped. This family doesn't need any more of her drama. He's my father too, I said. My voice stayed level, but I felt my pulse hammering. And if he asks for me, I'll be there. He won't, she said. He knows what you've done. I almost smiled at that, the irony cutting clean. He always knew, I said softly. He just never said it out loud. A nurse stepped into the hallway, then clipboard in hand. Colonel Whitlock is stable, she said politely. You can see him one at a time. My mother straightened, regaining her composure like slipping on armor. I'll go first. She disappeared through the door, leaving the smell of perfume and bitterness in her wake. Ethan sat down on one of the plastic chairs, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You could have just deleted the post," he said quietly. "Maybe it would have calmed things down." I looked at him, the younger brother who had always played diplomat in this house. "You think peace built on lies ever lasts?" "It's not about lies," he said. "It's about damage control." I leaned against the wall, watching the light from the ER flicker again. "That's all we ever did, Ethan. Control the damage instead of fixing the cause." He didn't argue. He just stared at the floor, shoulders slumped. The silence between us stretched heavy and familiar. When the door finally opened, my mother came out, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "He doesn't want to see you," she said. "You got what you wanted. Congratulations." She walked past me without waiting for a reply. I waited until she was gone, then asked the nurse quietly, "Can I go in anyway?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes, she said. The ER room was small, filled with machines humming a steady rhythm. My father lay on the bed, pale but alert, his uniform shirt folded neatly on a chair beside him. Even in a hospital gown, he looked composed, the colonel to the end. His eyes opened when he heard the door click shut. "I figured you'd come," he said, voice low and tired. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to." "I didn't," he said. Then softer, "But you're here anyway." I took a slow breath, stepping closer. "You don't look surprised. I've seen fallout before," he said. "Just not in my own house." I studied his face, the lines deeper now, the weight of the past week written across his expression. "You built a life on silence," I said quietly. "You taught us to believe that control was love." He looked away. "You think you know everything. You don't know what it's like to keep a family standing." "I do," I said. "I just stopped pretending it was worth standing if it meant stepping on everyone else." His jaw tightened, but there was no anger in it, just resignation. "You think exposing us makes you brave?" "No," I said. "It makes me honest." The monitor beeped steadily beside him, a faint mechanical heartbeat filling the gaps in our conversation. "They'll remember you as the one who turned on her family," he said finally. "Then they'll have to remember what the family did first," I replied. He didn't answer. His hand twitched once against the bedsheet, as if reaching for something invisible, then went still. I watched him breathe slow and deliberate, like a man measuring the weight of truth against the comfort of denial. After a moment, he said, "I read your piece." My chest tightened, and he stared at the ceiling. It was accurate. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "You mean accurate," he repeated. "Doesn't mean I liked it. I didn't write it for you to like, I said." His lips twitched, the faintest shadow of something that might have been a smile or maybe surrender. The nurse knocked softly on the door. "Time's up," she said. I nodded, turning to leave. At the door, I paused. "Get better," I said quietly. "Not for them. For you." He didn't look up, but his voice followed me out. "You always were the stubborn one." In the hallway, the red ER light reflected off the glass walls, staining everything crimson. My mother was gone. Ethan sat with his head in his hands. I didn't speak. I just stood there, letting the sterile air wash over me. Through the glass, the reflection of the red light trembled across my uniform, bright and fleeting. In war, we count casualties. In families, we pretend there aren't any. 3 days after the hospital, I found a letter in my mailbox with no return address. The handwriting stopped me cold before I even opened it, clean, disciplined, unmistakable. My father had the kind of penmanship the Army used to teach when everything still ran on paper. I turned the envelope over once, twice, and saw my name printed in the same sharp strokes he used for signatures on commendations and orders. Captain Dana Whitlock. Even now, he couldn't just write Dana. I stood there on the stoop for a long time before taking it inside. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The light outside had turned to a dim gray that made everything look like memory. I opened the envelope carefully, afraid the paper itself might disintegrate if I wasn't gentle. It was a single page folded twice, creased perfectly down the middle. His writing filled it, measured and deliberate, as though each sentence had been drafted, redacted, and approved before it ever touched the page. "Dana," it began. At first, I was angry because it was true. My chest tightened. I saw myself in your words, the way I stood silent, the way I mistook control for strength. I called it discipline. It was fear. I sat down slowly, the words already heavier than the page they lived on. You were right about the silence. It wasn't protection. It was habit. I believed that if I kept order, I could keep the world from breaking. Maybe that's what soldiers do. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that a family isn't a command. The ink was darker in places, as if he had pressed too hard, trying to make the truth stick. Your mother doesn't understand. She still believes peace is a product of obedience. Maybe I taught her that too. I don't blame her for wanting to keep the house clean of chaos, but I see now that cleanliness is not the same as clarity. I see now that you never stopped trying to reach me even when I made the distance impossible. I paused there, staring at that line until the words blurred. My mind flashed to all the moments that had built this distance, the ceremonies where I stood invisible, the letters never sent, the birthdays forgotten, the silence that always passed for civility. He continued, "When I read your piece, I told myself it was exaggeration. Then I realized it was documentation. You wrote it the way I wrote after-action reports, precise, factual, impossible to deny. And when I saw that video, I didn't see disrespect. I saw myself, the man who couldn't cross a simple gate to stand beside his daughter. My throat burned. I hadn't expected remorse, not from him. Maybe rationalization, maybe defense, but not this. If I could rewrite the years, I'd tell you that pride was never the same thing as love. That I was proud even when I didn't know how to say it. That I was wrong to confuse your independence with defiance. You were the first Whitlock to question the uniform instead of worship it. That doesn't make you disloyal. It makes you brave." The word brave looked strange in his handwriting. It had always been his word, never mine. Seeing it now written about me felt like the ground shifting beneath old ruins. "I can't ask for forgiveness," the letter went on, "but I can tell you this, you were right to speak. Sometimes truth costs medals, promotions, peace. But silence costs souls. I hope one day you'll understand that I was never angry at you for speaking. I was angry that it took you to remind me how." The final lines came shakier, smaller, as though his control had finally loosened. "Take care of yourself, Captain. You've already done what most of us never have, the hard thing, the honest thing. I wish I'd learned it from you sooner. Dad." That was it. No rank, no colonel's signature block. Just 3 letters, Dad, like an unspoken apology for all the years he had signed everything else with his title. I sat there in the dim light for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. Outside, a neighbor's radio hummed through the wall, a soft murmur of some country song about home and distance. I folded the letter once carefully along the crease he had already made. The paper smelled faintly of aftershave and hospital disinfectant. It was so unlike him to handwrite anything. The formality of it made the emotion underneath even more human, almost fragile. Later that night, I found out through James that my father had asked him to deliver it personally, but James had slipped it into the mail instead. "He didn't want you to feel watched," James said. "He said she'd read it if he sent it directly." "She would have," I said quietly. "She always reads everything before anyone else does." So he asked after a pause, "What will you do now?" I looked at the letter again. Nothing, I said. "You're not going to reply?" "Not yet." "Why not?" I smiled faintly. Because for the first time he said everything that needed saying. James didn't argue. We both knew words like that didn't come easily to men like my father. After the call, I walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept the few things. I couldn't throw away the bronze star, the unmailed letter I'd written in Baghdad, the photo from my West Point graduation. I slipped this new letter beneath them, folding it into the archive of things too personal to destroy, but too complicated to display. For a while, I just stood there looking at the drawer half open. I thought about the man in the hospital bed, the uniform folded neatly beside him, the medals that no longer sparkled the same way. He had built a career out of silence, and now, in his retirement, he had finally broken it, not publicly, not with ceremony, but with ink. And somehow that felt bigger than any speech he could have given. Before bed, I took the letter out one last time and tucked it into the pocket of my jacket, the same pocket where I had once carried the unsent letter to him years ago. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Some messages travel years to arrive in the right hands. Some apologies take half a lifetime to form a single sentence. I didn't call him. I didn't write back. But for the first time, I didn't feel erased. I folded the letter close to my heart, where the bronze star had once rested, and whispered the only response that felt right. Message received. Would you forgive him? 3 weeks later, the knock on my door came just after dusk. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. The sound was too controlled, too deliberate. 3 measured raps, like someone performing civility rather than asking permission. When I opened the door, my mother stood there holding a pie tin wrapped in foil. Pumpkin from the smell. The faintest echo of Thanksgiving. The irony wasn't lost on me. I brought this, she said, as if the offering itself could smooth over years of silence. Her hair was perfectly set, but the polish around her eyes had cracked. She wasn't here to reconcile, she was here to negotiate. Your father wants peace, she said finally. The word peace landed like an old photograph, faded familiar but out of place. I stepped aside but didn't invite her in. Peace, I repeated. That's what you call this. He's been through enough, she said, her voice softening in that practiced way of hers. The army is reviewing his commendation. They're saying the scandal damaged morale. They might strip his honorary medal. I folded my arms. Then they're not taking it because of me, I said. They're taking it because of truth. There's a difference. She flinched slightly the way people do when they've forgotten the person they're arguing with has already been trained to stay calm under fire. You think you're so righteous, she said, but all I see is a daughter tearing down her father when he can't even defend himself. He had decades to defend himself, I said, and me. He didn't. Her lip trembled, the first real crack in her composure. He's not the monster you think he is. I know, I said quietly. He's just a man who thought control was love. She looked away, blinking fast. You've humiliated us, she whispered. The neighbors crossed the street now. People whisper in church. He sits in that house and won't even answer the phone. Welcome to my world, I said. I know exactly how that feels. Don't be cruel. Cruel, I said, is pretending everything's fine while someone's bleeding under your own roof. The smell of the pie filled the doorway. Sweet, cloying, nostalgic. She shifted the tin in her hands. I baked this myself, she said, as though that meant something. Pumpkin? The way your father likes it. He still burns the edges right, I asked, and something flickered across her face. Confusion, then guilt. He doesn't bake anymore, she said finally. He just sits there, looks out the window. At what I asked, the life you both kept spotless. At the driveway, she said softly. Where you used to play. The words were small, but they landed hard. I could almost see him there, backlit by afternoon light, watching but never joining. That had always been his way, present but absent. He misses you, she said. He wrote you that letter. I read it, I said. It was the first time he ever told me the truth. Then can't you let it end here? She pleaded. He's tired, Dana. He's not well. You've made your point. Peace isn't a family heirloom, I said. You don't get to hand it back when it's convenient. She blinked fast, eyes glossing. Do you think I wanted any of this? You've turned our name into a scandal. They're calling me heartless. I met her gaze steady. Did you read the comments? She hesitated. No. You should, I said. You'd see the women writing things like, I was her once. You'd see how many people you called shameful for speaking. She shook her head, tears threatening to fall. You don't understand what it's like to watch the man you love crumble. No, I said. I only know what it's like to watch him stand there while you crumble and call it discipline. Her hand shot to her mouth, a sound escaping half sob, half gasp. They're taking away his commendation because of you, she said, finally the words trembling, a last attempt at guilt. Because of truth, I said again, my voice calm, unshaken. Not me. We stood there for a long moment, the silence thick enough to feel like gravity. She looked small in the hallway, her shoulders slumped, the pie trembling slightly in her hands. The woman who had once ruled every room now seemed to be shrinking under her own armor. "He just wants to see you," she whispered. "Then tell him to write another letter," I said. The first one worked. She nodded slowly, her breath uneven. "I never thought you'd turn out like this," she said, voice soft but bitter. "Strong?" I asked. "Unforgiving," she said. I smiled faintly. "Then maybe we finally have something in common." I reached out and gently pushed the pie back toward her. "Take it home, Mom. You'll need it more than I will." Her eyes searched my face, desperate for some sign of surrender. There was none. After a moment, she lowered her gaze, nodded once, and turned away. The sound of her heels faded down the hall, sharp and rhythmic like a retreat march. When the elevator doors closed behind her, the building went still again. I leaned against the frame, exhaling slowly. The scent of cinnamon and sugar lingered unwanted. I thought about Thanksgiving again, the table set like a stage, the unspoken lines, the silence rehearsed until it sounded like harmony. For the first time, I realized I didn't miss any of it. I closed the door softly, the click echoing in the empty apartment. The room felt lighter somehow, the air cleaner. I walked to the window, looking down at the street where her car pulled away, the taillights disappearing into the city's blur. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction. Just peace, the kind that isn't given but earned. The notice came in an official envelope stamped with the seal of the Department of the Army, the kind of document that used to make my pulse quicken for the wrong reasons. Inside was a formal letter. "Captain Dana Whitlock is requested to appear as a voluntary consultant for the Internal Review on Family Conduct and Public Representation." I read it twice, then set it down beside the coffee mug on my table. The irony wasn't lost on me. After a lifetime of being silenced in the name of military image, I was now being invited to speak about that silence. The hearing was scheduled at the base headquarters 2 weeks after the letter arrived. By the time I walked through the metal detectors, the story had already spread across internal channels. Some saw me as a traitor to decorum, others as the uncomfortable mirror everyone wanted to avoid. Either way, I had become part of the Army's own case study. The conference room was cold, the kind of cold that feels deliberate, meant to strip emotion out of whatever words are spoken. The panel sat in a neat row, 3 senior officers, a civilian ethics advisor, and a representative from public affairs. At the center was Major General Collier, a man I'd briefed years ago in Baghdad. He nodded to me, his face unreadable. "Captain Whitlock," he said, "thank you for coming. You understand the purpose of this review?" "Yes, sir," I said. "To evaluate how family behavior affects the Army's public integrity." "Correct," he said. "And also to assess the implications of media exposure surrounding recent incidents." The word incidents hung in the air like a euphemism too polite for truth. He gestured for me to sit. "You've been asked to provide perspective as both an officer and a family member directly involved in public controversy. You are not under investigation." "Do you understand I do?" I said. "And I appreciate the clarity." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Then, please, Captain, tell us what you think we should learn from this." I took a slow breath. The faces before me blurred for a moment, so many medals, so many walls built out of silence. I thought of my father, his letter folded in my jacket pocket, the weight of words finally written too late. "We teach soldiers to serve honor," I said finally. "Maybe we should start teaching families to honor service." There was a pause. Someone's pen stopped moving. "Go on," Collier said. "We spend our careers enforcing codes of conduct, training soldiers to embody integrity under pressure. But what happens when those same values don't exist at home? When families become PR symbols instead of people? We talk about duty and discipline as if they only belong in combat zones. But for some of us, the battlefield starts at the dinner table." The ethics advisor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, leaned forward. "You're saying the system rewards silence even outside the chain of command?" "Yes," I said. "Silence becomes mistaken for loyalty. And the cost isn't just personal, it's cultural. It's a message that says as long as it looks good from the outside, it doesn't matter who's suffering on the inside." The public affairs officer frowned. "Captain Whitlock, are you suggesting the Army intervene in family matters?" "No," I said. "I'm suggesting it acknowledge them. You can't build honor on denial." The families we celebrate in parades are the same ones breaking quietly in private. Maybe we should stop pretending those two realities don't coexist." Collier tilted his head slightly. "You believe your family represents this issue." "I believe my family is one example," I said. "And I believe I'm not the only one." He studied me for a long moment before speaking again. "You realize this discussion will likely make its way into the press." "Then let them print it," I said. "The truth has survived worse than ink." The ethics advisor smiled faintly at that. "Captain, she said if you could summarize what you want the institution to take away from this, what would it be?" I looked around the room at the flags on the walls, the framed photos of smiling officers shaking hands. "You can't demand integrity from the battlefield and ignore it at the kitchen table," I said. "If honor means anything, it has to mean something everywhere." For a moment, the room stayed silent. Not the kind of silence that suffocates, but the kind that acknowledges. Collier nodded slowly, the lines in his face softening. "Thank you, Captain," he said. "That will be all." I stood, saluted, and walked out. The hallway outside buzzed with the quiet energy of people pretending they hadn't been listening through the door. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone was already vibrating. James Avery's name lit up the screen. "You made quite the impression," he said when I answered. "They're already drafting a summary for public release." "Let me guess," I said. "They'll call it a productive dialogue." He chuckled. "You're not wrong, but your quote about teaching families to honor service that's spreading fast. Someone in the press office leaked it to a journalist at Military Times. It's already making rounds on social media." "I didn't even plan that line," I said. "That's why it worked," he said. "It sounded like truth, not policy." "My mother will hate it," I said. "She thinks honor only counts when you're wearing medals." "Maybe she'll learn something," he said. I didn't answer. I could already imagine her reaction, the fury, the disbelief that her daughter had once again turned a private matter into public discourse. But this time there was nothing left to hide behind. The story had become larger than us. By evening, articles began appearing online. Captain Whitlock's statement on family honor resonates across military circles. Soldier calls for reform in how families represent service values. I skimmed through the headlines, then closed the browser. For once, I didn't need to read what people thought. I knew what I'd said was right. Later that night, as rain began to fall against the windows, I unfolded my father's letter again, tracing the words where his pen had dug into the paper. "You were right to speak." For the first time, I believed he would have been proud of this speech. Maybe not publicly, but quietly. In the privacy of a heart learning too late how to listen. I tucked the letter back into my pocket and whispered into the dark. "We teach soldiers to serve honor. Maybe we should teach families to honor service." Somewhere out there, maybe someone was listening. It happened quietly, the way all endings do. One morning, the phone rang while I was reviewing a new project brief at my desk, a contract role that kept me just close enough to the Army to still smell the starch on its uniforms. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the voice on the other end stopped me mid-sentence. "Dana," Ethan said, and just that my name in a tone that sounded older, tired. Mom left. I waited for more, but all I heard was the soft crackle of static. "She said she can't stay in that house anymore," he continued. "Packed up her things last night, took the car and went to stay with Aunt Lila in Wilmington. Said she needed distance." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the patch of morning sunlight crawling across the floor. "And Dad?" I asked. "Still there," he said. "He doesn't talk much, just sits on the porch most days. Started tending the garden out back. Tomatoes, I think. It's weird." "Weird." "Yeah," Ethan said. "He's never touched dirt in his life, but now he's out there every morning with gloves and a watering can like it's the only thing keeping him upright." I could picture it clearly. My father still in a pressed shirt, sleeves rolled up, crouched over a row of plants as if discipline could make something grow. "He's not angry anymore," Ethan added. "Just quiet." "Silence again," I said. "It's all we ever knew." "This one's different," Ethan said softly. "It's not the kind that fills the room. It's the kind that follows you around when you leave." We didn't speak for a long time. The years between us, his compliance, my rebellion hung in that pause like something both of us had stopped trying to fix. Finally, he said, "He asked about you the other day. What did he say? Just one thing. He asked if you still write. I smiled faintly. Always. He read that article about your hearing, Ethan said, the one where they quoted your speech. I turned toward the window, watching clouds drift lazily across the Carolina sky, and he cut it out, Ethan said, folded it into one of those leather notebooks he used to keep for mission notes. Didn't say anything else. The idea of my father still the colonel, still precise. Folding my words like they were orders to keep made something inside me tighten. You should visit him, Ethan said. He's not the same. Neither am I. He's trying Dana. He doesn't say it, but you can see it. The yard's covered in those little white garden stakes. It looks like he's building something from scratch. I wanted to say that forgiveness didn't grow just because you watered it, but I didn't. We hung up soon after, and the apartment felt impossibly still. The letter he had written me was still in my drawer, folded beside the old one I never sent. Two sides of a dialogue that had taken years to happen. That evening, I opened my laptop to check the news, half habit, half avoidance. Buried on page 4 of a regional site was a headline that caught my breath. Colonel Richard Whitlock delivers closing remarks at Veteran Reform Forum. The thumbnail photo was small, slightly blurred, but I knew that posture anywhere. The article was brief, just a recap of a local event in Raleigh. He'd been invited to speak about transparency and leadership, a topic that would have once made him uncomfortable. I clicked on the link. The reporter described him as composed but humble, speaking softly into the microphone. His closing lines were quoted in full. After years in service, I've learned that courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it looks like the act of speaking when silence feels safer. I was reminded of that by a daughter who showed me what courage looks like. My hand froze on the trackpad. I reread the sentence 3 times. A daughter. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the words, the way the screen light reflected faintly on the window beside me. Outside, traffic murmured along the street life, carrying on in its indifferent rhythm. I imagined him standing there, hands on the podium, speaking the truth aloud for once. Not as a colonel, not as a father trying to preserve image, but as a man who had finally learned the difference between order and honesty. It didn't erase anything. It didn't fix the years. But it was something I never thought I'd hear acknowledgement. I forwarded the article to Ethan with no subject line, no message. 10 minutes later, he replied, "He meant it, you know." He practiced that line 3 times before the speech. I smiled. Of course he did. I murmured, "Old habits. Perfection even in confession." The next morning, I found myself driving toward Fayetteville without deciding to. The road seemed to remember the route better than I did. I passed the familiar landmarks, the diner near the gate, the row of tired houses, the rusting water tower that used to mark the edge of home. When I reached the street where I grew up, I slowed down. The house looked smaller than ever, the paint peeling slightly near the porch. And there he was, kneeling in the yard, trimming a row of tomato plants lined in perfect symmetry. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and just let me go. Either way, I didn't stop. Some distances don't need to be crossed twice. That night, I sat on my balcony back in town, the evening air warm and sweet with the scent of magnolia. I pulled up the article again, the quote glowing softly in the dark. A daughter who reminded him what courage looks like. For years, I had chased some version of that recognition, thinking it would heal something, fill the missing piece. But reading it now, I realized it wasn't his acknowledgement that freed me. It was the act of no longer needing it. Somewhere out there, he was tending to his garden, finding discipline in creation instead of control. My mother was learning what silence sounded like when it wasn't power. Ethan was finding peace between us both. And me, I was finally standing outside the echo chamber we called family breathing air that didn't demand permission. The house had broken, yes, but maybe breaking was what saved it. Sometimes silence doesn't end with an explosion. Sometimes it just stops pretending it's holding anything together. Memorial Day 2025. The Carolina air was warm and heavy with the smell of cut grass and polished brass. Flags lined the streets leading into Fort Bragg, each one fluttering just enough to catch the sunlight, the kind of ceremonial movement that always made me think of breath held in collective reverence. I hadn't been back in a year, not since everything had unfolded: the article, the hearing, the speech that broke my family clean in half. Yet when the invitation arrived, embossed with the Army seal, something in me said yes before I even finished reading. Captain Dana Whitlock, guest of honor. Not daughter, not Colonel's family. Just Captain. It was the only title that had ever belonged fully to me. The memorial field stretched wide before the main stage, white chairs aligned in precision rows. The brass band rehearsed softly in the distance, their notes drifting like echoes of every service ever rendered. I adjusted the bronze star on my uniform, feeling the familiar weight of it against my chest. For the first time, it didn't feel like proof of endurance. It felt like closure. "Captain Whitlock," a voice said behind me. I turned to see James Avery, now a major. He looked almost the same, slightly grayer at the temples, still sharp in his dress blues, still holding that air of someone who knew the weight of silence. He smiled. "Didn't think you'd actually come back." "Neither did I said. "But I figured ghosts shouldn't have better attendants than the living." He laughed softly. "You've changed." "That's what distance does," I said. "It gives you room to breathe without asking permission." We walked together toward the seating area reserved for officers. Cameras clicked somewhere behind us, press covering the event, but not me this time. My story had cycled out of the news months ago. The world had moved on as it always does, leaving behind just enough residue to remind you it happened. "You ever miss home?" James asked quietly as we took our seats. I looked out over the field, the endless rows of flags waving in unison under the late morning sun. "I'm standing on it," I said. "Every inch of this place made me who I am. I don't need the house to remember that." He nodded, and for a while, we didn't speak. The ceremony began an invocation, the national anthem, the reading of names, the kind of ritual that never really changes, because grief doesn't need innovation, it just needs witness. When the band started taps, the sound hit like muscle memory. I felt it in my bones, in every mission I'd survived, in every silence that followed one that didn't. The officer at the podium began the closing address, a colonel I didn't know personally but recognized from the new reform committee. He spoke about honor service sacrifice. Then, unexpectedly, he paused and shifted his notes. "Before we conclude," he said, "I'd like to acknowledge someone whose courage extended beyond the battlefield. Captain Dana Whitlock, whose advocacy reminded us that integrity doesn't end when the uniform comes off." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras turned. I stayed seated, hands still spine straight. It wasn't vanity that kept me from standing, it was something quieter. Gratitude mixed with disbelief. James leaned over and whispered, "You just got commended without ceremony." "That's rare." "I've had enough ceremonies," I said. "They're better when you don't have to wear armor." After the event, people mingled handshakes and polite smiles trading across the crowd. A few junior officers approached me, nervous but eager. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say your hearing speech. It's part of the leadership course now," one said. "They call it the Whitlock Principle." "The what?" I asked, half laughing. "You know," another chimed in that line about teaching families to honor service. "It's in the ethics module." I blinked, taken aback. "Well," I said finally, "I guess that's one kind of inheritance." They saluted, thanked me, and moved on. James was waiting by the bleachers, hands in his pockets, looking toward the horizon. "Your father would have been proud today," he said. "He was the one who started the reform committee before he retired for good." I turned to him slowly. "I read about it," I said. "Didn't think he'd actually follow through." "He did," James said. "He even quoted you at one of the briefings. Something about silence being the enemy of honor." I exhaled. He always did like good sound bites. That wasn't a soundbite, James said. That was confession. I didn't answer. The sun had shifted by then, casting the flags in streaks of light and shadow. Somewhere in that movement, I thought about him kneeling in his garden, tending his tomato plants, learning the slow language of care. My mother had sent one letter months ago, short and cautious. "He's calmer now. The house is quiet. I hope you're well." No apology, no explanation. Just acknowledgement, like the first fragile step in learning how to speak again. "You going to visit him?" James asked. I shook my head. "No. I don't need to. That doesn't sound like closure." It is, I said. Just not the kind people like to see. He studied me for a moment, then smiled. You ever think about writing another piece? Maybe, I said. But not about him. Or me. Maybe about what comes after the noise. You always did like the hard topics. That's where the truth hides, I said. Under the noise. A breeze swept across the field, catching the flags again. They rippled in slow motion, each one a story, each one a reminder. I reached for the bronze star pinned to my chest, my fingers brushing the cool metal. The sunlight hit it just right, reflecting a thin line of gold across my sleeve. It no longer felt like something I needed to earn or prove. It just was part of the whole, not the point of it. So, James said, where to? Now I smiled. Anywhere that doesn't mistake silence for peace? He laughed quietly. That narrows it down. Good, I said. I've had enough noise to last a lifetime. As we walked back toward the parking lot, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The flags still waved in perfect formation, the sound of the band fading behind us. For once, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything unfinished. The past was buried here in discipline, in grief, in love, misunderstood, but so was the beginning of something new. And maybe that's what reconciliation really meant. Not return. Just recognition. The apartment was silent when I returned. Not the suffocating kind of silence I once knew. This was different. Lighter. Chosen. The late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, painting long golden bars across the hardwood floor like shadows that forgot to be heavy. I set my keys down on the counter, removed my uniform jacket, and let my shoulders drop for the first time in days. The ceremony, the speeches, the folded stares of officers who didn't know whether to salute me or avoid me. It was all done now, all of it. My boots echoed gently as I crossed the living room to the small kitchen table, 2 seats, 1 crooked leg, coffee rings staining the wood. I had never bought a bigger one. Never needed to. A single envelope sat in the center white against the grain. My name in my father's handwriting. No stamp. James must have dropped it off while I was gone. I stared at it for a moment before sitting down. My fingers hovered, then opened it. 1 sheet. Handwritten. No signature this time, just the words. Dana. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't ask it. What I do ask quietly, without rank or role, is that you live free. Free of the weight I carried, free of the name when it no longer serves you. I wore the uniform for 35 years. I did what I thought was right. Sometimes I mistook fear for order. Sometimes I let silence win. But your voice broke a pattern that needed breaking. If that cost me a commendation, so be it. You didn't shame me. You freed me. Wherever you go next, I hope you know you were never a mistake in this family. You were the truth we refused to speak. Be well, be whole, and if you ever write about me again, make sure it's honest. That's the only version I deserve. I folded the letter not neatly and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. Some things don't need reaction, they just need space. I stood, opened the small cabinet above the fridge, and pulled out a box of pre-mixed pie crust. It had been there since last fall, one of those I'll bake someday purchases I never made good on. Today felt like someday. I rolled it out on the counter, filled it with what I had frozen blueberries, a splash of lemon cinnamon that expired 2 months ago but smelled fine. My hands moved with a strange certainty, like they'd been waiting for a ritual. I pressed the crust edges together, clumsily uneven. I didn't trim the excess. Into the oven, it went, the smell slowly replacing everything else in the room. 35 minutes later, the crust was too dark at the edges and the center still a little loose. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. I placed it on the table, no plates, no forks, just the pie and 2 cups of coffee. 1 black, 1 with cream and sugar. Just like that last Thanksgiving. Just like the one where I wasn't welcome. Only this time, no shouting, no mother's stare, no father's silence. Just the sound of the ceiling fan turning above me and the hum of something closing in peace. I sat down, looked at the empty chair across from me, and raised my cup. To the quiet table, I whispered, to the space no one can take anymore. I cut a slice, let the crust flake, let the filling ooze out the side. I didn't care about presentation. This wasn't for anyone else. This was mine. A quiet, uneven slice of something whole. Somewhere outside, a siren passed in the distance, brief and fading. The world went on. But here was stillness. Chosen. Full. The kind that doesn't ask for apology or tradition or ceremony. The kind that doesn't erase to feel big. The kind you earn after the war, after the articles, after the years of silence stretching so long you forget your own name. I knew who I was now. Not just captain, not just daughter, not just the woman who wrote the post. I was the one who stayed standing when the house fell. And now I was the one who knew how to build a smaller one. Quiet, solid, real, voice over. This year the table's smaller, but no one's missing. Not the daughter, not the truth. Not the love that had to grow wild because the garden was fenced too tight. I reached for another slice. No plates still. No forks. No rules. Just presence. Just enough. If you've ever been erased by your own blood drop in the comments, you're not alone. We grow up believing loyalty means silence. That keeping the peace is how you protect a family. That not speaking is the same as honoring. But it's not. Silence is heavy. It builds layer by layer until one day it breaks you, or you break it. For years, I thought I was the only one carrying that silence. Turns out I wasn't. The quiet had rippled through generations, fathers who saluted pain, mothers who disciplined love children who confused obedience with belonging. I know now loyalty to truth saves more than it destroys. I learned that lesson in 100 moments, none of them glamorous, most of them private. Like the time I stared at my uniform in a mirror and couldn't remember why I earned it. Or the time I stood at the back of my father's retirement ceremony while my name was scrubbed from the program. Or the night I wrote down the words that finally cut through the noise of pretending. The daughter of silence. That name used to feel like shame. Now it feels like legacy. I can live with that. Outside my window, the flag at the base sways in a soft breeze, calm, no fanfare, no salute. Just wind and fabric and sky. It's the same flag I once stood under as a cadet, hands shaking, waiting to be assigned to a future I didn't yet understand. I see flashes now my younger self in dress greens, too stiff in posture, too desperate to please. I see the dusty tents in Baghdad, the base in Germany where I spent Christmas alone, the long silent nights in Syria where the only sound was breath and responsibility. I also see that kitchen in Fayetteville, that Thanksgiving, that slap, that moment when I realized silence wasn't neutral, it was complicit. There's an old photo of me in uniform on my mother's mantle. James told me she still keeps it there. Doesn't talk about it. Just dusts around the frame like a wound that never closed but never bled out loud. I wonder if she ever looks at it and asks who that daughter was. If she'd recognize the woman I became. I don't expect she does. I don't expect she'll ever say my name again without a tight jaw or lowered voice. That's okay. Some silences we can't break, but others we must. My phone buzzes on the counter. A message from James Avery. You did good, Captain. Simple. Steady. He always knew how to say things without dressing them up. I text back a single word. Thanks. No need to say more. He saw it all. He helped hold the line. And maybe in a different world, there's a future for us. But for now, I have something else to finish. I reach for my leather-bound journal, the one that's followed me through 9 deployments, 2 continents, and a lifetime of unsent words. The pages are soft now, corners bent ink faded in spots. On the last page, I write, The Daughter of Silence Part 2, when silence ends. I let the pen linger after the final word. Not for drama, for breath, for finality, for the knowledge that the next chapter, whatever it is, will not be built on erasure. Outside, the sun dips below the edge of the base housing line, casting long amber streaks across the parking lot. Somewhere, another daughter is putting on her boots. Somewhere, another soldier is staring down a silence no one warned her about. I hope she finds this story. I hope it reminds her that silence may be part of the uniform, but truth is how we honor it. I close the journal and set it on the table next to the cooled pie. The apartment is still, not empty, full. The kind of full that comes after a storm passes and the air smells clean. I stand stretch walk to the window and let the last light of the day warm my face. Not everything will heal, not everything will return, but some things, clarity, voice, peace, don't have to. Because now, they live here. In this silence I chose. In this quiet I built. And in this story that is finally mine. If you've made it this far, then you already know this story wasn't just about military medals, command chains, or ceremonial flags. It was about something far harder to earn and even harder to protect dignity. And if it stirred something in you, a quiet memory, a long silent ache, a family dinner where you were left without a seat, then I want you to hear this clearly. You are not alone. There are people watching this video right now from Jacksonville to Juneau, from Pensacola to Portland, and they've carried the same weight Dana did, the weight of being dismissed, erased, rewritten out of a story they helped build. Maybe your version didn't happen in a base chapel under the watch of a retired colonel. Maybe it happened in your mother's kitchen, or your father's funeral, or a wedding where you sat in the back while someone else took the credit for raising a family. But the pattern is the same. Silence is weaponized. Disapproval is passed down like heirlooms. And when someone finally dares to speak to write their truth, the response isn't always gratitude. Sometimes it's fury. Dana's story hit a nerve not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted recognition. And there's a difference. She didn't leak names. She didn't drag her family through the mud. She told the truth about a moment where she stood on the other side of a gate and was told by blood that she did not belong. Think about that. All the deployments, all the field reports, all the service, and still she was reduced to a paperless invitation. How many of us have experienced that same invisible barrier? Not a gate with guards, but a voice, a glare, a missing name in a wedding toast, or a graduation speech telling us, "You're not one of us." That kind of erasure doesn't make headlines, but it leaves bruises just the same. Let me ask you something directly. If you were standing where Dana stood in full dress uniform on a warm May morning outside the Fort Bragg base, and your own mother said, "You're not invited. Go home," what would you have done? Would you have begged? Broken down, yelled, walked away, and carried the shame quietly for another decade? Or would you have done what Dana did? Documented the moment, turned pain into testimony, and lit a match under the legacy that tried to silence her? I don't ask this lightly, because I know many of you watching, especially those over 50, were raised on a different kind of loyalty. The kind that says family first, even when that family forgets to put you second, third, or anywhere at all. The kind that confuses obedience with love. And I want to make space for that struggle. I know it's not easy to speak when you were taught that silence equals strength, that good daughters endure, that fathers always know best, but maybe, just maybe, it's time we rewrite those definitions. Maybe strength means showing up even when you're told not to. Maybe endurance looks like telling the truth even when it hurts the people you hoped would protect you. And maybe love, real honest love, isn't afraid of accountability. So if you've been watching in silence on your couch, your phone, your lunch break, and this story hit closer than expected, let me invite you into something braver than quiet empathy. Speak, share, tell me your version. Where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Is it early morning and you're drinking black coffee while replaying a conversation with your father that never sat right? Is it 11 p.m., the house dark, and you're wondering if your sister still tells people she's an only child? Or are you watching from a parked car somewhere between errands with tears in your eyes because finally someone said it out loud? Wherever you are, I want to hear you. Not the polished version, not the sugar-coated rewrite your family expects at reunions. The real version, the one you've carried for years, maybe decades. The one that starts with, "They told me I was too sensitive," or "They said it was for my own good," or even just, "They never said sorry," because when we put our truths together, something shifts. The silence breaks, the story expands, and we begin to see that what we thought was shame was actually survival. You survived, like Dana. You stood in the heat of someone else's disappointment and didn't shrink. You chose your own voice over someone else's version, and that's worth more than any ceremony, more than any ribbon, more than any fake family photo captioned pride. Because here's the secret they never want you to realize. The moment you speak up, they lose control. And you win something far more valuable. Not revenge, not pity, but clarity. The kind that lets you walk past the gate through the silence into your own life uninvited maybe, but unstoppable. Now, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your location and time in the comments. And then finish the sentence. What would you have done when Dana stood outside the gate that morning? She wasn't just a soldier, she was a daughter. And in that moment, medals didn't matter. Rank didn't matter. Service, sacrifice, deployments, discipline, all of it collapsed under 5 cold words from her own mother. You're not invited. Go away. And that's the part that stings the most, isn't it? It's not the insult from strangers. It's the betrayal from people who were supposed to stand beside you, not behind closed doors. People who raised you or claimed to until you grew into something they couldn't control. For many of you watching, especially those over 50, this story felt painfully familiar. You've told me in the comments of other videos about fathers who didn't hug, about mothers who used silence as punishment, about holidays where the turkey was warm, but the words were ice cold. So let me say something as clearly as I can: being cut out by your family isn't your fault. Being written out of the script isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their fear. Fear of truth, fear of independence, fear of seeing you as more than a character in their story. Dana wasn't rejected because she failed. She was rejected because she refused to fold. And I see that same refusal in so many of you, the quiet resistance. The ones who chose truth over tradition. The ones who stopped apologizing for not fitting the mold. The ones who said no to family scripts written in guilt, shame, and obligation. You didn't show up just to play the dutiful daughter, the silent sibling, the invisible anchor. You showed up with your own voice. And for that they punished you. Not directly, maybe, but with sarcasm, with omissions, with absence. Some of you have sat at tables where no one passed the potatoes your way. Some of you have watched a slideshow of family photos and seen yourself missing. Some of you have been asked, "Are you really wearing that?" Or told, "Well, we just didn't think you'd want to come." And some of you, like Dana, have shown up in full armor only to be turned away, not by enemy fire, but by the people who gave you your name. Let's be honest, this kind of betrayal doesn't leave bruises you can show. There's no cast, no X-ray, no ER light. Just that tightness in the chest when you see them laughing in a photo you weren't invited to take. That ache when you realize the birthday card wasn't forgotten, it was never meant to come. That sting when your sibling gets called the strong one while you're labeled difficult for having boundaries. And in families like that, speaking up doesn't make you a traitor. It makes you free. When Dana published her story, she didn't name names. She didn't attack. She testified. And that's what I'm inviting you to do now. Not to shame, not to seek pity, but to reclaim authorship of your own life. Tell us, where were you watching when it hit you that this wasn't just a YouTube video, it was your own story in uniform? Maybe your uniform was emotional labor. Maybe your deployments were years spent caring for everyone but yourself. Maybe your battlefield was a dinner table or a hospital room or the front steps of your childhood home. But you know what it feels like to be dismissed. You know what it feels like to stand outside the metaphorical gate full of accomplishments of dignity, of love, and still be told you weren't enough. Here's the hard truth. You could win the Nobel Prize, and some families would still find a way to say you changed. You could come back from war with medals, and they'd say you look tired. You could build a life from ashes, and they'd ask why you didn't do it sooner. But that's not your burden to carry. Their discomfort isn't your shame. Their refusal to celebrate you doesn't mean you're not worth celebrating. Dana didn't wait for an apology. She didn't beg to be let back in. She built her own platform word by word and let the truth do what it always does when it's told. Well, it echoes. And if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own family, like someone edited you out of a photo or a memory, then let this be your echo too. You're not crazy. You're not dramatic. You're not the problem. You're a page they couldn't control, so they tried to rip it out. But you're still here, watching, thinking, feeling, healing. So tell me, and tell the others reading alongside you, where are you watching from? Drop your location and time in the comments, and then finish the sentence. What would you have done if you're still here, still reading, still feeling something stir deep in your chest? then this story wasn't just entertainment, it was recognition, and maybe, just maybe, it was a little bit of permission too. Permission to stop justifying your pain, permission to stop minimizing what happened because they're family, permission to finally say out loud what you've whispered for years: I deserved better. When Dana stood at that hospital window watching the red ER lights flicker on her father's skin, she didn't gloat. She didn't break down. She didn't beg to be let back in. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes revenge is silence. Sometimes revenge is not returning the call, not opening the door, not carrying the burden anymore. It's baking your own pie and burning the edges without shame. It's making your coffee and leaving a second cup out, not because you expect someone to join you, but because you finally like your own company. Some of you wrote in past videos that you've gone decades without family contact. Others wrote that you're still in the thick of it, trying to navigate phone calls laced with guilt holidays that feel more like audits and siblings who were groomed into golden children while you were left to weather the emotional storms alone. And for many of you watching, especially those over 50, the weight of that history isn't just emotional, it's physical. It's the migraines, the blood pressure, the quiet eating at your sense of self. Because generational wounds don't just fade, they echo. But here's what Dana's story shows us: you can outlive the script. You can walk away from the dinner table without a plate and still be full. You can attend a ceremony you weren't invited to, not to crash it, but to outgrow it. And when you do, you'll find something remarkable waiting on the other side of that hurt piece. Not forgiveness, maybe. Not full closure. But peace in knowing you didn't stay silent. Peace in knowing you chose truth over tradition. Peace in knowing that someone somewhere saw your courage and said, "Me too." We don't heal alone. We heal when someone else finally names the thing we thought we imagined. That's what this story is. That's what you are right now. You're a witness to someone else's fire, but your presence here fans the flame of your own healing too. So let me ask you again, and this time answer for yourself, not just for Dana. If your own family erased you from the narrative, would you speak up? If the only seat at the table came with conditions, would you walk away? If silence was the price of being accepted, would you still pay it? Because here's the thing: someone else is reading your comment right now. Someone you've never met. Someone whose hands are shaking just typing. Someone wondering if their story matters. And when you say, or "I've been there," or "this hit too close," you're not just reacting. You're lighting a match. You're saying you're not alone, you're not crazy, you're not invisible, and that matters more than you know. So this is your moment to turn a reaction into reflection, to turn pain into connection, to turn the silence that suffocated you into a voice that frees someone else. Tell us where you are, what time you're watching, and what you would have done if you were Dana. And then come back next time. Because the daughter of silence isn't just her. It's a generation of us. This channel isn't just for stories. It's for truth, for reckoning, for release, and for you.